Hi, everyone. It's Killeen and Stacy Harding bringing you another episode of Fourth Level Conversations. We're really excited to be with you. Actually, it's exactly a week before Thanksgiving and
Mm.
lots of things going on in our minds to be grateful for or plans. And maybe you're looking forward to it. Maybe you're feeling like it's going to be hectic. I'm not sure. But we're excited about our discussion. And I have been speaking with Al this morning, and he's got a topic for us that I haven't even heard yet. So I can't wait for our discussion. So, good morning, brother. Let's get started.
Good morning, brother Stacy. Listen, before we start, I want to share with you the magnificent environment that we're having this discussion. So I'm going to take you and the audience over to my window that my office looks out on, and bear with me here for just a second because I think this will be a nice kind of homage to the context of what I hope is a very uplifting and beautiful conversation with people. So this
Oh,
is
wow.
my office, and that's our little sugar tree. And look at our black-faced English sheep that I look out on.
We can see them over there. I don't know how clear they are. My
Oh,
goodness.
probably through the window. They aren't very clear, but I'm just sitting here looking out on this magnificent cold day here outside of Nashville, where it's sunny but it's cold, and I had all these sort of revelations happen for me this morning, which I always think of as communications from divinity. And we started out this morning talking about discussing karma. As ye
Mhm.
sow, you'll reap, the golden rule, what they all have in common, and why they exist, and what's a blessing about them. And then I went through this profound realization in the shower, and it kind of was an expansion on this topic of karma. And I think what it really, well, I'll lay out how it occurred to me, and then what I think its message is. So today in the world, people can walk into a Costco or a Walmart or a Target or a grocery store and they can find a product called Liquid IV. Liquid
Mhm.
IV has touched the lives of millions of people. And Liquid IV exists because I was a bellhop at a hotel in 1972. Now, how in the heck does that tie together and what does it matter? So I'm in college at CU and I'm coming from a poor family and I've got to work in school. So I get a job as a bellhop. I can sit there and do my homework while I'm at the little bell desk and it all worked. And in this hotel I worked, people were coming and going. This group of executives came in that were moving out from Detroit. They were moving a pharmaceutical company out from Detroit to Broomfield, Colorado, and they were staying in our hotel. And I got to know them, and they were nice guys. And so I was in grad school at the time, and they were such nice guys that I thought I'm gonna give up on being a university professor, and I'm gonna get out in the world and get my hands dirty because how many co-eds can you seduce with a sweater and leather patches on your elbow over time without really just feeling like it's a hustle? I figured I need to figure out what life was. So I decided I'm going to go to work for them. So I go to work for them as a pharmaceutical salesman. In traveling around northern Colorado, my territory, one day I happen into a Seventh Day Adventist doctor's office, and while I'm waiting in the doctor's office, I pick up a pamphlet to read because I'm waiting to see him in between patients, and it's on meat in our diets because Seventh day Adventists are notorious vegetarians. And I read this little pamphlet and I instantly decide I'm going to be a vegetarian. So for the next 27 years, I'm a vegetarian. And so I start practicing being a vegetarian in 1976, 5, somewhere in there. And there's nowhere to buy what you can buy today. Now there's all kinds of, there wasn't then. So I looked around in the little town I was living in Longmont, Colorado, and this little grocery store had opened up that was called Noah's Ark, that was sort of like a Whole Foods early on. And I go in there to get my food, and there's this family running it. And as I get to know the family, so now I'm a vegetarian, I need a place to eat and shop. I shop at the store, I get to meet the family that runs the store, and they end up asking me to go to work for them. I go to work for them. A year into working for them, I realized that my boss, who is the daughter of the owner, I'm in love with. And so I start to date her. I end up getting married to her. And we now have been married 46 years. But after about 10 years, our first son is born, Cameron. 6 years later, our second son, Holden. Cameron, born in 1988, grows up, goes off to school at Loyola Marymount, and after he graduates, he ends up in 2013 having a guy come to him and tell him that the only remedy in my life I've ever had that's cured a hangover is Pedialyte, the infant formula. He goes to the grocery store, he buys a bottle of Pedialyte, gets excited, tells two buddies, let's start this world's first morning after hangover remedy called Liquid IV. They start this company. He later goes through some stuff that has him leave the company. But I realized Liquid IV exists today if you trace it back to me being a bellhop in 1972. What does that mean? What it means to me is there's something called the long cycle of God. And the long cycle of God is so vast compared to our human sense of time that we want to see immediate consequences, back to karma, immediate consequences. And that's probably what led me to this thinking, was that karma, and as you sow, you reap, doesn't always occur immediately or even from the sources that you have behaved toward. It happens in its own time, from its own direction, but invariably comes back to you in an experience that teaches you a lesson about your selfish behaviors, or even your selfless behaviors. And so, what happened in this story I tell of bellhop to Liquid IV is I realized that, kind of like Central American, Native American populations, they have astronomic scales that go short cycle, mid cycle, long cycle. I think their long cycle is 52,000 years or something. Well, if we look at the way God works, divinity, source, whatever you want to call it, it works on a different scale of time than we do, and therefore we don't always recognize the golden rule. We don't always recognize karma. We don't always recognize how the purity of our heart, to a comment you made before we started today, really comes back to it, or the lack of purity of our heart. And I saw this as an insight that I was given this morning, that for us to appreciate the case for operating as a personification of the golden rule and trusting that takes faith. Faith is how we access recognition of the long cycle of God. And when we recognize the long cycle of God, we become much more deliberate and conscious and pure in our intentionalities of our moment to moment thoughts, actions, intentions, and behaviors, because we know we're sending pebbles into a pond that are going to ripple out to the shore and come back to us. But it may come back to us over a long period of time that we don't recognize from the human scale. What's your thoughts about that premise,
Oh,
brother?
that's a beautiful story. And you had told me about Cameron and Liquid IV, and that's amazing that you can trace it back to literally the bellhop if you start to think about it. And so I started thinking as you were describing all that, and it's like nothing gets wasted. Nothing in
Right.
our lives get wasted. It's not like you went through a day and you're like, well, nothing happened today. It was a wasteful day, or it was a non-eventful day. It's just not true. There's something that has an impact on others and on the world from our actions and our existence every day. And I thought about, as we think about that what a great opportunity to understand about contentment. That if I realize that whatever goes on today, whatever the plan is, that it has a part of the grander scheme, and therefore I don't have to worry whether it's going to yield something for me, but will it for the world in a positive way, and I can have contentment whether today was exciting or not. Because most days aren't
Let's let's
exciting.
let's let's play a game, brother, because you and I didn't plan this.
Okay.
Think about something in your life today, pleasant or unpleasant, doesn't matter,
Sure.
and something that stands out when I say, Stacy, what's one of the most important things happening in your life today, whether
Yeah.
it's pleasant or unpleasant. Take that thing and then trace it back for us as to how that thing came into existence, so you can help us into your thought process of creating a recognition of the long cycle of God.
Yeah, I can do that. Um, I think about a long career in the mortgage industry that is no longer my life, but I'm on a journey of a couple of different paths with a coaching company and attachment to IMP. and also starting a franchise for a chiropractic organization. And I can trace it back to when I graduated from college at Kansas University, all the way back in 1984. And I thought I was going to go into the Christian ministry. And my preparation for that was with an organization that was having orientation for 3 months in Fort Collins at the CSU campus. I'm a kid from Kansas, and I come spend a summer after graduation to there. And I think I'm going to go be in this Christian ministry. Maybe I'm going to become a pastor someday. And as I'm there, about 10 days before that, I fell in love with this young woman at Kansas that still had another year of school. And this organization was going to send me way away from her. And I decided after a lot of walks at night and prayer that I'm not going to do that. And so I didn't. I went back and spent time in Kansas, got in the mortgage business by accident, found a way to be fairly successful at, grew my business, got married, had children, moved to Colorado, and went through lots of years of what you might say were the best of times, growing a family and building some financial security and perhaps getting some influence in the world. And that came to an end. And now I'm doing what I'm doing today. And it all goes back to perhaps falling in love with this woman 10 days before I graduated from college.
Right.
And there would have been no hesitation to go down that path.
I think that's beautiful. And tell me how you then see that series of events that goes back 40 years through the lens of faith. What's the role of faith in recognizing that whole consequence of actions and thoughts and decisions and the long cycle of God?
Yeah, and so it does come back to that belief and faith in God for me about the whole thing. And I say this to people a lot. I don't know if they always believe it for themselves, but I always say that God's got a plan for your life. I'm not sure everybody believes that. Some people may believe in it a different way than I do, which is perfectly fine because mine is just mine. And so I can go back to that and say, oh, I didn't know it at the time, but God's hand was in that all the way along. And even the failures that I've had and the hardship I've had, we were talking about this earlier about suffering. Those were, I don't think that any of it has ever been punishment from, our creator of the universe. But it may be the suffering and learning is the gift. It's the actual expression of love. And it takes faith to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens from that, Al, is it gives you faith to trust today and faith to trust the future. That it's all a grand design and it will all work out for good in the world and for yourself. And that doesn't mean we don't have hardships or illnesses or unexpected loss and death, and that could come to us. But it's still perfect. And that's the role that faith has to play for me in that is that nothing is happening that shouldn't. That it may not be the way my mind perceived it, but if I'll release my heart to that plan, all is well. And then there becomes contentment, peace, joy, happiness, and maybe more enlightenment.
That's beautiful. And, as I think about your life, you made that decision after walking on the campus at night that your love for her mattered more than this idea of being a minister, which to some extent may have been what you thought you should do because of your scripting in childhood of being raised in a religious family that went to church and you believed in God and you thought, here's what I should do then. I should go and be a minister. And then you chose love instead. And that love led to children. And those children have their lives, their decisions, and they went the way they went. But you brought them into the world, and they will in turn bring others into the world. You created a whole legacy, a lineage of new bodies for new souls that are going to multiply because of your love for Heather. And you had this incredible career. You tend to kind of poor mouth it, but I'm here to say, you were one of the icons of mortgage lending in Denver, Colorado, and nationally, because you were the second in command at a significant company. And I think in many ways, the soul of that company, despite the fact you may not have been at the top of the house, I think you had the heart of that company. And you had a big name in the industry and a big image. Then you went through this downfall, you could call it, which it wasn't, but you could call it that. Some people maybe called it that. And this image you had in the world, you had in my mind 20 years ago, of this incredibly handsome, incredibly talented golfer with great power, making a lot of money, running a big company. To the world, you literally had it all. You were like the ideal of what every man thinks he would aspire and hope to ever have. You had all of that. That changed. And the quality and the grace, brother, with which you have handled that change is one of the most inspirational examples I've seen in my life of someone who has essentially realized all along that they weren't that surface image that the world thought they were. And behind closed doors, they had all the issues every human being has. And you have been a living expression of faith that really has been present. It shows up when we are in challenging moments to accept new realities. And you've been such an example of the power of faith in the calm grace with which, as I've gotten to know you now, you're so much more than that worldly image you were 20 years ago, because the quality of your inner self is so much more apparently higher on the mountain or evolved than that surface presentation of wealth and power and looks and golf game and all that, that I think God had a plan for you, and it was for you to become a minister, but it was to be a minister to help people that may not necessarily go to church see a larger way forward, that life is going to have its moments of surprise and change. But if you catalyze your decisions out of love, like you did, that led to this different path away from the ministry, and then you manage the changes in your life through the lens of faith, giving you appreciation that you trust where it's going, even in moments of suffering, I would argue that you're even a more impactful minister on a bigger stage today than you would have been had you followed that original inclination. Therefore, I think God wanted you to be a minister, but he wanted you to be a minister giving people a pragmatic example of the fact that you don't have to be a minister to be in touch with God, to be in touch with faith, to be in touch with love. Your own life can be your ministry by how you relate to changes within it, and whether you are able to keep faith and grace and love and trust of God through those moments, which you clearly have at a huge level. You may be among the most impactful ministers I've ever met.
Well, I love if there's ever something that would warm your heart, hearing those words from Al Killeen, it doesn't get any sharper or better than that. So thank you, brother. But I'm sitting here thinking about folks that might be watching this and they might think of their own lives. And the message that I keep hearing as we discuss these things is how precious and value our lives are. And most people that would be watching this probably have some sense of humility in their lives. And I do think that there is genuine humility. And then I think there is kind of a little bit of diminished value that we place on ourselves by trying to be humble. So in other words, if someone's thinking, well, maybe my life doesn't matter as much, it just isn't true. We are such a gift in this world, and you've got the reminder of the statement of our lives is God's gift to us. What we do with them are our gifts back to God. And I think about that when I'm going through kind of some challenges or disappointments, because most of the time when we're disappointed is because we had an expectation that didn't get fulfilled, right? And a lot of times it's based upon our level 3 selfish nature and so forth. But if we can stop and say, oh, I wonder what God's going to do with this.
Right.
I wonder what impact this is going to have, not only in the world, but in my life. We were texting back and forth this morning. The thing that occurred to me as you were proposing subjects was like, I can't wait to see what happens from it. I just got some excitement about we never know when we go through each day what the outcome is going to be. We plan, we try to organize our lives around that. But for those of you watching, your life, everything about your life today matters. You might have no big plans going on. Maybe you don't have any excitement, but whatever it is today, your life matters. It matters to Al, it matters to me, it matters to this world. And so if we
Mm.
could start to accept ourselves and still remain humble as it relates to our interaction with others, but be excited about how important your life is, because it is. And
Mm.
we need people to be confident in their lives. And I think back to your story about being the bellhop and me going back to walking the campus and walking away. I've received a fair amount of criticism of walking away from a Christian ministry for a woman. And during those years, I thought, wow, did I miss a calling there? And then when I hear you describing what we talked about today, no, didn't miss it. Did exactly what I was supposed to do.
Well, if we think about the purpose of ministry is to not just pontificate what your beliefs are in God, but to lead people to God. And I think there are religious ministries, Stacy, and I think there are spiritual ministries.
No
I
doubt.
think religious ministries, and I'm not making a statement of good or bad about either one, but I think the way religious ministries work is they have a very confined, narrow set of access points to God in the way they think. Baptists, Catholics, Methodists,
Sure.
Hindus, whatever, Muslims, you get to God in this way. A
Mhm.
spiritual ministry, and I think of that, frankly, often as a level 3 type of ministry, because it tends to be limiting as to there's people on the boat and off the boat. A spiritual ministry, in my opinion, is level 4, that is the ministry of the heart. And that's actually, I believe, what God really wants in terms of ministries isn't necessarily that you're even identified as a minister,
No.
but rather you provide into the world a purity of heart that's in alignment with the purity of love and faith and true humility, and that you let God take it from there as to how it impacts people without you necessarily even be recognized as some catalyst for that. And therefore, I would argue a spiritual ministry is more pure to me and even more impactful than a religious ministry because it isn't limited to only people in that particular congregation. I think you decided to play a bigger game. You also bring up humility, and I think there's a bold and clear difference between level 3 humility and level 4 humility. I think level 3 humility tends to be self diminishing. I think because level 3 ego sees the world as separate, me versus everything outside of me, level 3 humility is understood as self diminishment. Don't think of yourself as anything special. Give all the credit to God and trust other people. And that ends up undermining self worth and self faith. That hurts God too. He doesn't want you to hate yourself, He doesn't want you to feel bad about yourself. But often that's how it's interpreted through the lens of an ego based interpretation of humility. A level 4 humility, however, so I think of level 3 humility as essentially a state of self diminishment because you have an either or choice of either believing in God or situations, but not yourself, or being arrogant in level 3 terms and trusting and believing in yourself. And yet, in my work and your work in coaching people, we see that the foundation of a lot of people's suffering is their poor relationship with themselves. So, how do we fit all that together? I think level 4 humility. Level 4 humility is not self diminishment, it is a recognition of the ego and a staying outside of the ego in favor of this pure space of your soul as captured by the values that you believe in life and that you're willing to embody, personify, and act out of without regard for what's in it for me or thinking you're anything special. And from level 4 humility, therefore, it's not a self diminishment, it is an ego diminishment. It's a recognition of the limitations of an ego based self and an opening up to not needing to even have a clear definition of what being a level 4 soul is because you just become a vehicle of the long cycle of God. You become a vehicle for whatever God's plan is for you and for other people. Therefore, when I've said for 25 years now, if I could do anything, I would save the world and die anonymously. I think the most important part of that is dying anonymously, because to the extent that I don't seek the recognition or acknowledgement for whatever I contribute to the world in whatever way, I'm not even subtly playing to getting that ego reinforcement of I'm a good guy, I'm special. And I believe personally that God trusts us to the extent that we withstand the temptation of the need for acknowledgement of our impact on others. Then we can be trusted with the power to do more of it in a bigger way. And that's why I think all of the statements in the Bible and the Dhammapada and the Quran and all of them that have to do with being selfless are really a principle of how to not only have a fulfilled life, but to have a meaningful life. And all you have to do is give up the need for your acknowledgement of your participation in it as some special catalyst of anything. We're all just basically tools of a larger plan and a larger source. What are your thoughts?
Isn't that what we all want eventually, is to have a meaningful life that matters? I think this idea of joy and happiness and sadness and sorrow, it's all fleeting. It doesn't last throughout every moment of every day. And so those come back to our emotions. And when we get to this level 4 concept of how we think of selflessly, we begin to actually experience those things for what they are.
Right.
And we can appreciate all of them.
Right.
And I was thinking about your little let's play a game, Stacy. I wanted to suggest to the group that's watching this, do this for yourself. Think about the long cycle of God in your life. Go set aside 10 minutes and think from where you are now and just kind of start going backwards and say, oh, that moment in life determined this, and go all the way back as far as you can. And you will see God in your life. And you will see the role that faith has played in your life. And you'll start to trust yourself, and you'll trust the world, and you'll trust God more, and your faith will be richer and deeper. Al, that was brilliant. That was
brilliant. What you just said, I think, is brilliant. I also wanted to go back to something you said earlier before we close here, Stacy, which is what you were talking about earlier. Really, to me, relates back to the how interesting story. I think the power of the how interesting story, and I think we've shared that story on previous podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember? Right.
We have.
I think what's powerful about the how interesting story is when we can have events happen in our life that may be adverse, may be painful, may invite our fear, may invite our destruction of faith, may invite our darkness and pessimism. If we can replace reaching a conclusion about those things, that means I'm bad and I deserve it, or there is no God, or God's a mean God, or any of that, if we can instead suspend that in favor of simply pausing before you reach any emotional conclusions or reactions and suggesting to ourselves how interesting, what those two words do for me anyway, is they buy me time to look at it through the long cycle of God and say, well, what may be good about this that I can't yet see in the future? The real value of the long cycle of God in seeing what happened in the past is that what you are doing today is creating ripples in the pond that are going to manifest 30 years down the road. You're going to have children that cure cancer because you walked into a grocery store and met a girl you fell in love with, or whatever, and you acted on it. Therefore, the only thing that we can really trust in staying in the long cycle of God is to operate out of the purity of your heart today, without expectation that you're going to get a reward for it, but simply because, if nothing else, to operate out of the purity of your heart is a recognition of your faith in that which will live beyond you and that which will occur outside of your awareness, which is really none of your business. We are all here as vehicles of a larger game. And I think that game is to make the words of Christ pragmatic, that we learn to love one another regardless of whether our ego wants to think of one another as enemies or not, and that we are kind to each other, and that we operate in a spirit as though we're doing it in front of the ultimate benevolence of divinity that is not punishing us, but simply noticing how we're doing with coming to the conclusion that we need to move beyond the limitations of ego and that we are vehicles of something far more sacred and far longer than these lives of ours that we're going to live. I'll let you close it out, brother.
Yeah, that was awesome. I was thinking as you're describing the interest, isn't it interesting? I thought about when I first started learning a little bit about meditation, and that the instructors would share with me that, when you're in a state of meditation and thoughts are going to come to your mind. But if you can, instead of becoming a judge of those thoughts or saying, gosh, I want to not have those, just observe them, don't judge them, and let them float away like a cloud. And I thought about what you were saying there, and I'm like, what if we could become observers of our own lives and those of others without judgment?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we don't have to make critical decisions about right and wrong. That's not it. But what if we could just be observers and say, I wonder what impact this might have in my life and theirs today and in the future? Things would change, the way we think and see things. And then the molding of our hearts and souls would be in line with that longer journey with God.
I have a final exercise that I'd like to share with everyone that I do every night now that has really been very helpful to me. Before I go to sleep at night, I imagine my mind is a sacred temple, and I see it as almost an Asian kind of Zen temple that is a small but clean and pure space with very little furniture in it, but really has an energy field of divinity, candle perhaps burning. And I see myself in my mind going and opening the front door of that temple and the back door of that temple and the window on the left and the window on the right. And this temple has butterflies in it, and the butterflies are thoughts. And I let the wind from the open door and the open windows gently blow the butterflies out the door and the window. So the temple is now empty and silent with the flickering candle. And from that space, I feel like now I'm alone with God, and I can have my empty mind and my silent mind finally hear the voice of God.
Wow. You know what I would say? If you have a hard time falling asleep, just do that. That's better than counting sheep, jumping over a fence. What a beautiful thing to think about. That's awesome. Well, we hope you all have enjoyed the conversation. I know I sure have. And Al, it's always great to be with you, buddy.
Stacy, you're a minister, my brother.
You are as well. We love you all. Take care.
Love you. Bye-bye.